Well, we're fortunate enough. This is my second time to be able to speak with Kelly Zeigner, the president CEO of United Way London Middlesex, or Elgin Middlesex, sorry. And Kelly, it's so much has happened just in the last few months since we've talked. So many things that people had kind of counted on in society seem to be at play right now, and it's a little bit difficult to know what the future is going to look like. But one thing we do know is that after 2 years of doing your virtual harvest lunch, the 3M harvest lunch this year, you're finally able to bring people back together. And I think that's really important to emphasize and for people to be part of. Why don't you tell us a bit about it, where it is, the date, so on and so forth, and how people can take part?
Yeah, we are so thrilled to be able to offer 3M Harvest Lunch again this year in person. It's been a tough couple of years for everybody and everybody in the nonprofit sphere who rely on those big special events to, help raise funds, help raise awareness. And we're certainly not immune to feeling that. Fortunately, for the past couple of years, we pivoted to this pay it forward model. So while you couldn't come out to the typical harvest lunch that everybody knows and loves, people were buying a meal for neighbors in need. So what we did this year is that was a wildly successful, interestingly, the non-event event. And so we actually sold more tickets than we ever had, which shows the generosity of our local communities. But we are certainly hearing that folks want to be able to reconnect with people. So this year we're still keeping what we learned through the pandemic insofar as when people buy their tickets, it's a $20 ticket and it gets lunch for you and for a neighbor in need. So people are going to be coming down to Victoria Park in London and Horton Street Farmers Market in St. Thomas in September for outdoor food truck type rally and a campaign launch, all in support of local communities.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Like I remember COVID started just prior to our spring food drive, which is our big one,
Yeah.
right? A couple of years ago, and we went virtual, and we didn't know what was going to happen, and it just blew out all records, right? Like
Yeah.
people could donate financially, they couldn't get together and drop off food that way. But it's amazing what happened to the community. It kind of transformed it in ways I'm not sure any of us were fully expecting. We were
Yeah,
testing
for
the
sure.
water, see what would work and what didn't, and the public was really there. It's interesting what you're talking about the virtual and where we're going to go, because I know that as we've been through the pandemic, many of us as organizations have had to test the waters in different ways to see how we're going to be, and yet we didn't really need to worry all that much in that sense. The public and businesses and organizations, churches, mosques, the others, they all came through in bigger ways, I think, than I was planning on anyway, and it was really great. But now we're coming out of that,
Yeah.
and as that is slowly receding into the background, I have personally been seeing some changes just in people that I've talked to. A good example would be the homeless file. For
Mm.
instance, I think that there was a great amount of empathy that came out from people when COVID first hit, right?
Yeah.
They realized just how difficult it was for the homeless. They couldn't go to agencies. Many of them had closed down or had minimized operations. And there was just such a huge outpouring of support for the homeless, and not just from citizens, but from governments as well. I mean, all of it
Yeah.
was great, but I have sensed that changing a bit. I have talked to some who, you see some old prejudices that were there about homelessness and that were there prior to the pandemic. And so, but we've emerged from the pandemic, and I would say probably one of our biggest problems has been homelessness. That has not changed. I was in touch with Mike Savage, who's the mayor of Halifax. He's also the chair of the big mayor's caucus, and he said this is their number one concern for every city across the country is
Yeah.
homelessness. And I know United Way is well aware of all of that, but I know when the 519 Forgotten group came out and the hunger strike was on, albeit briefly. I know that you folks at United Way, you put out your own notice to the public and also to the players that were involved with it, but it wasn't so much just focused on homeless, it was really focused on frontline workers.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could explain where you got that from, but also what was it that you were explaining in that publication?
Yeah, it was the timing was interesting because we were in the process, of course, of preparing for our fall campaign, and we fund a range of housing stability programs in London through London Cares. And so I had literally just spent, a week out at the agency talking to their executive director, talking to frontline workers, talking to folks who were formerly homeless, and learning a little bit more about their journey and what they're seeing on the front lines. And
Yeah,
what really, really struck me was the concept of moral injury. And that's how it was explained to me, because we're often talking about, how all of us are feeling this burnout from the pandemic. And it was explained to me that what these frontline social service workers are feeling is moral injury. So they are faced every day with deciding who gets help and how much help they get, understanding that there's not enough help for everybody.
yeah,
So when there's such limited housing available and there are hundreds of people unhoused right now, how do you choose who gets a home and who does not? And understanding that a home isn't just a nice place. It can truly be life-saving for
yeah,
somebody.
yeah,
And so imagine, being a frontline social service worker, wanting to do the best for your community and for your neighbors, and being faced with those choices every day. It really takes a hard toll on those frontline workers. And certainly empathize with, the folks that are unhoused, but also to the folks that are trying to help them cobble together whatever resource is available in our community.
yeah. I thought that was great that you did that because that actually wasn't front and center so much, right? I mean, the
Yeah,
focus was really what are you going to do about house homeless? Where are you going to put them? Where are you going to house them? And I was really happy to see United Way do that because in many ways we'd already been through that with frontline health workers, right, during the
right.
pandemic.
Yeah, yeah.
And we understood how much they went through. And Jane and I, we've been spending some time watching 5 Days at Memorial, which is the Apple show about the
Mm,
hospital during Katrina
right.
when that all happened, and they had to make gut wrenching decisions as to who survived and who didn't. And there were all
Yeah,
these people making judgments of them from the inside and from the outside. And
yeah,
it tore these frontline workers apart, right?
yeah,
The very thing you're talking about, the ethical or the moral kind of balance that these folks carry as they're trying to help other people. It sounds great when you're first in it, but then when you suddenly realize you don't have the resources that you hope that you would have to be able to deal with those problems, that's a real issue. So I think it's really important that the United Way drew attention to that because we often forget that stuff.
yeah. And you could certainly hear it in their voices and in their messages when they were out there. This absolute sort of frustration and fatigue from what they were seeing every day. And kudos to them and to all the partners who got to the table and spent long hours. They were there well into the night and into the next day to really find solutions that were an improvement for our friends and neighbors that are unhoused. And hope that that spirit of collaboration continues. We've talked about before in the last time we chatted, Glenn. The one thing the pandemic certainly showed us is we can work together and we can work together quickly.
Yeah.
And I think as we were coming out of the pandemic, we tended to get back into our regular grooves. And this was a good jolt to say, no, the status quo is no longer. It's not acceptable. We can do this, and we can work together, and we can innovate and move faster.
Yeah. Let's talk about the pandemic a little, shall we? Now that we kind of look at it a bit in our rearview mirror. But
Yeah,
I remember the last time you and I talked, I was saying how much United Way helped us as we were trying to distribute food, the largesse of the London community to all these different groups. She really helped to connect us at different points. But do you have any lingering sentiments from it? I have a number. I'm sure we all do. But
yeah.
I wonder how you feel now as we're moving into this. Do you think it has changed a community's mind sufficiently to get us to start doing things different? Or do you see it more as an event, an elongated event that happened, and
Yeah.
then people are just going to try to get back to business as usual? How is it that you feel about that?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, if you had asked me 6 months ago, I might have said it was an event, but
Yeah.
now it just feels like it's become this way of life, right? And I think leading an organization, leading social service organization, we are just all working and sort of change is the new normal, right? There's just something new
Mm.
coming at us every day and some unintended consequence of a policy decision or, a health reality that our community is facing. So I think it's forced all organizations, for profit, nonprofit, to be more nimble and to be ready and willing to adapt. Um, I worry for organizations like the Food Bank, for United Way, who rely on the support of the community, is this sort of shared fatigue that we're all feeling. Um, Added to that, the cost of living and inflationary pressures that everybody's feeling. So,
Yeah.
of course, folks on the lower end of the income spectrum are going to be feeling that the worst and the sharpest. But then, folks who are sort of middle income, who tend to be really generous to organizations, may be the ones that are finding themselves in need of support or not able to give as they once did. So that's going to be a challenge for all of us, I think. But as you and I have both expressed, we know our community is incredibly generous and folks who can roll up their sleeves best they can.
Yeah. I think of all of the organizations out there like ours and yours and others, I think the United Way has been best positioned around the business and corporate community. I mean, you really learn to work within that framework to get them involved and get them supportive. But I'm wondering how that side of it feels to you as well, because I know a number of business owners who
Yeah.
aren't even sure that they're going to survive. Right.
Yeah.
But I'm sure that you would probably see and feel that much more acutely than the rest of us would. How is your feeling about that? Where do you think the business community is in all of this?
Yeah, I think it is a strange new world for all of us. I think in the corporate sector and just as an employer, everyone's feeling the pressures of labor shortages and a changing labor market and how we work and how we do business. So, if you think of a United Way campaign 5 years ago, it was, in a large office at One London Place, and
Yeah.
everybody is, having a bake sale and all these in-person events and really sort of building momentum for supporting their community. That's changed and forever changed. I don't think we're ever going back to that full time. And so, looking for those opportunities to connect, I think that's where giving, corporate giving and employee giving, whether it be to United Way or any other nonprofit, I think that is an opportunity for corporate partners to engage their employees, because I think we're all struggling with the remote workforce. How do we keep folks engaged? How do we keep them, wanting to be involved in their workplace or in their community? And I think um, community support, supporting nonprofits, is a really great engagement tool that corporate partners can be using in the midst of this changing workforce.
Yeah. Can I be honest with you, Kelly, and tell you what my biggest fear is?
Yeah.
I think as somebody who's worked in Ottawa and seen how government works, and I don't know how many recessions we've been through in our 36 years. You guys have been through more of them.
Yeah.
But as I look through it, always, you get through that recession. It's been really, really tough. And then you kind of try to rebuild. But from a government point of view, a recession is a huge expense. Right.
Mhm.
You deploy a lot of finances and people resources and other things to help people get through that. And then depending on the government, but it usually works this way, when you end up and the recession ends, then you begin to start paying off some of the bills of the borrowing
Right.
or things like that you did. And then strangely, social services or nonprofits often end up going through a darker period because
Yeah.
the social programs are restricted or cut back. Some programs are cut altogether. Some supports directly to organizations from governments can also really dry up. And in my 36 years at the food bank, this was no recession that we just went through. I've never been through anything like it in my lifetime.
Yeah.
But that would be true for you as well. So I really worry that when you look at the $1 trillion that have been spent on all of this to try to, and we needed it, it helped to get us all
Yeah.
through it. But now we could be moving into an era in which all of a sudden cutbacks begin to come, right? And then all of a sudden, groups like United Way, the Food Bank, all of the others, all the groups that are doing such great work could be up against it. They might find themselves with less resources and not more. And I, just because of my knowledge of how government works, I really do worry about that. We're thankful that they're really there during the recession, but then it tends to lead to consequences that might were maybe not intended, but it
Yeah.
ends up to being a harsher time. Do you ever have worries about that, or have you seen that? Or
For sure. Everyone I'm talking to is certainly feeling it. Like it feels like we're standing on the edge of a cliff, right? Like we sort of know that these austerity measures will come in government as they often sort of do in those cycles. And so I think everyone is really nervous about that. Again, like through the pandemic, some of these great programs like CERB, like demonstrated, like point blank, like this works, this universal basic income works for folks, and we saw there's new reporting that poverty numbers went down, and so I think that is a bit of the frustration when you see these programs that have been so successful, that have been really meaningful and made important changes in people's lives, then they sort of get taken away and onto the next thing, or austerity measures. And so we continue to advocate, for increased investment in the programs and services themselves, but also in the sector,
right.
to ensure that the sector can be resilient and
Mhm.
preserve that social service safety net. I tweeted a few weeks ago that um, while we are so grateful for all of our donors, philanthropy alone is not the answer to fixing homelessness, to fixing poverty. We really need policy solutions from all three levels of government. And so we'll continue to blast that horn loud and clear.
Yeah, and I want to get to that in a minute. But I was an MP during the Great Recession,
Yeah.
2007, 2008. Ed Holder
Yeah.
was an MP, Mayor of London. Joe Preston, now the Mayor of St. Thomas, he was an MP at the time. We would often speak and talk about these things, but it's a tough thing to be in government because you've got all of these different groups that are saying,
Yeah.
okay, if you're going to cut, don't cut us,
Yep.
or whatever it is. But really, a lot of it is prioritization. Governments have to know where they think people are at. And if
Yeah.
people are willing to speak up about these things, government could listen to that and respond to that. If we don't speak up, though, often it's the groups that are in nonprofits or the charitable sector that aren't able to do it. However, they are the ones that a lot of the burden is passed on to.
Right.
People who are homeless in communities, right?
Yeah.
Not in parliament. So it is going to be a real challenge, and we are really going to need businesses, citizens, and others to speak up about what the priorities are in their community, and to try to get the senior levels of government who emphasize the
Yeah.
financial side and take care of it to reflect those priorities. I certainly hope that will happen. I think in most of the recessions that I've been through, that did not happen
Yeah.
to any great degree. So this one's going to be interesting. But you talked about policy, and policy at the end, it's really about how people live, how they
Right.
interact moving forward. And policy sets up these kind of guardrails that allows people to do all that interaction, to buy, to sell, to start a company, to be an immigrant when you come to Canada. All of these policies are there and they're great. But a lot of them exist that actually could be effective, but aren't emphasized, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And I know that the United Way of Elgin Middlesex sent, a note to the paper, to the province, not all that long ago, with 20, was it 21 recommendations? I'm trying to
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
21 recommendations of what you thought had to be done along these lines by the province. Would you mind going through not just what some of those are, but how did you get to that process of producing that?
Yeah. So one of the great things that United Ways have been doing a better job of is getting together as a collective movement. So while we are all autonomous local organizations, there is some power of us coming together provincially or federally to raise our voice about what we're seeing in local communities, because we are local community experts. And the themes in that letter are not surprising. It's around income supports, it's around housing, it's about addressing racism and oppression. So common themes that we're hearing in all communities. And I think, we always take the approach of, it's not about any one party, it's about
Yeah.
effective policy. And, we have a conservative government right now, but making some of these upstream investments are going to save money downstream, right? And that's, a great example of this would be, we know, as we discussed, we have lots of unhoused folks who are sleeping rough in our community. We have lots of people, who come downtown London or have businesses downtown London who are deeply concerned about, one, the people, and two, their well-being and being able to conduct business in that environment. So if you're seeing, property crimes increase, putting more folks on the streets to address that issue isn't necessarily the answer. Let's get people into homes. That's a bigger policy decision that needs to be made, and a bigger investment that saves money down the line, because then you're not involving police or sending folks to emergency rooms when they're in crisis. You have people supported in their own homes. So those are, I think, good business decisions, right? Those are smart investments that we should be making and taking a longer term approach. But as you know, working in government, it's often like made in 4-year decision points based around elections. And so it gets hard to stay the course on some of those longer term trajectories and investments. And that's certainly what we are encouraging. We need deep investment in housing, and not just any kind of housing, of deeply affordable housing, so
Yeah.
that people can, have homes and be supported in the way they need.
And that's why policy, am I right, is so important that I think in the States, for instance, right now we're seeing it. A president has trouble getting something through, so he does an executive action.
Yeah,
So in the Oval Office, he signs that I want this thing to happen, but then the next president can come in and just wipe that off the map, no problem. Whereas if it goes through the legislature, right, and becomes policy, it's much more difficult to really gerrymander that
yeah,
to some particular person's way or party's way of thinking. And it seems to me you're really right. If it's to become policy in the province, especially because that's close to us and that's who you directed your recommendations to, but if it has to work through the legislature and become policy, starting with committees, working its way
yeah.
through, getting voted on in the House, it's very difficult later on then to come around and reverse that so easily. And that's why
Hmm.
policies are important. But it is easy for us as social agencies or nonprofits to say, hey, look at my cause, look at my cause. I could really use an infusion of cash here or investment.
Yeah.
And that is really true. It's true across the board. And I get all of that. But the idea of saying, no, work together as parties and solve this homeless problem together, to design a policy together.
Yeah.
Because long after you and I are gone, those problems are there and they endure, and we need enduring solutions that go to them. Am I right? Is that how you see policy?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's playing the long game, getting the right folks to the table to think about what is it that we want and need for our communities. And I think, the challenge is, you know, yes, we need those long-term solutions, but there are issues today. Right. So, we can't, you and I can't just close up shop and only work on policy, because there, are thousands of people in our community that rely upon this social service safety net. So I would say the answer is yes, and we have to do both things.
Yeah.
We have to be able to do that frontline work and make sure that people are getting the care they need today, but be always keeping in mind those longer term solutions and fighting for those. It's just it just makes so much sense. Like, and you would see this in working in food security, where, if somebody has low income and they're diabetic and they can't afford the foods that they need, it exacerbates their problems. They
Hmm.
end up in hospital or needing medical intervention. And the answer could have been ensuring that people had the appropriate income to be able to feed themselves with nutritious food, to prevent all of these bigger health concerns later down the line, right? It's all of those prevention pieces that are linked to the social determinants of health. Getting people food, homes,
Yeah.
are those building blocks of successful lives that prevent issues from getting bigger.
Yeah. So you and I talked a few months ago, Kelly, and do you remember what my final question was of you?
I don't.
Yeah,
Was it?
I said, "Can I get personal with you for a minute?" And you got that troubled look in your eye and
Sure.
wasn't sure. And
Oh,
I said, "Are you discouraged? Have you found it like too much?" And so I'm going to, now that we've come out of this and we're entering into a new stage, can I ask that question again and see how you feel?
yeah. I mean, it certainly is a tough slog. As I said, it's that we're in this. I think I'm reading a book right now called "No Plan B." Like there is no plan B. Change is the new normal, and so I think you know I'm energized by that kind of ambiguity. Not everybody is, but I'm finding folks are starting to get used to that sort of new normal, whether it be our staff team or volunteers or people out in the community. Um, we continue to have uh, amazing stories of generosity, of people willing to come to the table, big and small, from a kid's birthday party to the largest corporate partner to our labor friends who roll up their sleeves and help us get the hard work done. And those are the things that keep me going, right? That energy and that
Mm.
commitment that people have to a better tomorrow for our community.
Yeah. Good answer. I like that one. I'm kind of with you on that one. Kelly, I think if it hadn't have been for government, I think we all would have had trouble getting through the pandemic. But when I look at it at a
Yeah.
local level, if it hadn't been for United Way, and I know you partnered with the Community Foundation, London Community Foundation, doing stuff, that stuff, it was great. But you folks are so pivotal. Thank you for all of that. I think you probably never got thanked enough. You were just, your head was in it the whole time, trying to get things done. But we really,
It
really
takes a village.
village, but United Way is central to that village, and we really appreciate that. So just go over with me one more time. What is the date of the harvest lunch?
Yeah, so we actually have two separate events in London. It's on September 19th from 12 to 1 at Victoria Park,
Yeah,
and in St. Thomas at Horton Farmers Market on September 22nd.
yeah,
So if you go to our website, unitedwayem.ca, all the information's there. You can get your tickets. You can get a great lunch, network with, and see some of your old friends you might not have seen for a while. And the best part is your ticket also buys lunch for someone in our community.
that's the way to do it. Thank you,
Yeah,
Kelly. Thank your board
great.
and everybody. I mean, you've taken us through a really tough time. We really appreciate it, and we'll be out on harvest lunch day.
Okay, we'll see you there, Glenn.
Thanks.